Recently, I had a client reach out to me on Instagram. He was a big fan of these Dragonball Z Vegeta Adidas Ultratechs, but he said he really didn't like the sole on them. What I'm going to be doing today is taking the soles off of these Vegeta Ultratechs and swapping them out for the soles of these 350s. Let's start by getting these bad boys separated. I started off sole separation on the Yeezy 350 compacts with the heat gun to break down the glue bond. Then I broke out a bone folder to pry the uppers away from the soles before peeling them back as best as I could using my hands. Once I had hit the heels, I broke out a steam gun to help to further break down the glue bond. My sole removal process was essentially the same on the Dragonball Z pair. I started off using my heat gun to break down the bond of the factory glue before pulling out my bone folder to pry the uppers away from the soles. Once I had safely cleared the toe box where all of the suede material laid, I was free to use my steam gun to help to further separate the uppers from the soles. This was an especially tricky process because I needed to ensure that I preserved the uppers during the removal. I was able to cleanly separate them without any sort of damage. I got the uppers from the Dragonball Z Adidas separated from the soles, and my Yeezy 350 sole separated. Before I stick them together, it's time to do my prep work. I started off my prep work on the 350 soles using some paint and glue remover from the sneaker dock. This helped to weaken up the factory glue bond, and using a dull razor blade, I was able to scrape off the majority of the factory glue with relatively little effort. Let me tell you that PGR is definitely a game changer. Once I had applied a couple of coats of PGR, I resorted to some acetone and cotton balls to make sure that all of the factory glue was gone. For the uppers, I needed to remove the black heel cup. I started by weakening the factory glue bond using my heat gun, and then pulled out a weeding tool to pry the heel cup away from the uppers. Once I had it pried away a little bit, I was able to use brute force from my hands to remove the rest of it. Unfortunately, this did expose a little bit of raw leather. I continued my prep work on the upper by skiving away all of the factory glue, and then resorted to a metal grinding bit on my Dremel tool to help remove as much of the factory glue and debris as I possibly could. After prepping the uppers, I pulled out the lasting board and used a grinding bit to help to remove all of the factory glue and debris from there as well. With all of my surfaces prepped, I aligned the uppers to the soles using some heat erasable pens. I did this to make sure that I had proper alignment between the components and that I was going to get a nice clean bond. With everything aligned, I pulled out some sanding drums on my Dremel to ensure that I had exposed some raw leather and had some good surfaces to bond together. Then I used a grinding bit on my Dremel to make sure that all of the factory glue and debris was gone from the internals of the upper before breaking out some acetone and cotton balls to finish up my prep work and remove any remaining glue and debris. With my uppers and my soles completely prepped, it's time to get these things aligned and add some glue. I started my glue application on the soles using some barge super stick, applying 2 thin layers approximately 15 minutes apart from each other to ensure nice, even coats. Then I moved on to the uppers, where I followed a very similar process, following the lines that I had already made using my heat erasable pens and Dremel. After I had applied 2 light coats to both the uppers and the soles, I let it cure for about 5 to 6 hours before it was time to bond. I started my bonding process at the heels, where I aligned them and then used a heat gun to reactivate the barge super stick and ensure that I had a nice strong bond. Once I had secured the heels, I moved up to the toe, where I made sure that I had everything aligned appropriately, which allowed the medial and the lateral sides to fall into place just as I wanted them to, and then I followed the same reheating and reactivating process using pressure from my fingers to bond everything together. With the upper securely in place, I had to get my lasting boards reattached. I applied a light layer of barge super stick to the midsoles as well as to the lasting board, and after an hour of cure time, I placed the lasting board inside the sneaker and then used my heat gun to reactivate the super stick and firmly get everything in place. This project was nearly done, but I did need to touch up some of the raw leather using some Angelus leather filler and some Angelus paint before smoothing it out using some sandpaper and some Liquid Kicks factory top coat to ensure that everything looked as factory as possible. Once I had all of my touch-ups completed, it was time to reinsert the insoles and lace these sneakers up so that they could be finally considered finished. Now that I finished up this Yeezy Dragonball Sole Swap Hybrid, let's take a closer look. At the end of the day, I'm extremely happy with how these things came out. This was an especially challenging upper to work with because I had to make some crazy alterations to the shape to help it to fit to the sole. Additionally, I also had to remove the black heel cup, which ended up causing a lot of gaps in the leather that I ended up having to fill, sand, and then paint over. These things definitely came out crazy nice though, and I'm proud to say that it's probably one of my best sole swaps yet. I'm really juiced with the way that these kicks came out, but I'm curious to hear what you guys think though. Let me know in the comments below. As per usual, thank you to everybody that stuck around until the cold, bitter end of this video. You guys already know, I'm Sailboat, and I'm out of here.